Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the QCIC Student Series from the Queens Chamber of Commerce, where the Chamber connects college students with subject matter experts in business from across Queens County. Some of our past webinars have included topics on marketing, real estate, and law, and all those previous sessions can be found on our website, on our YouTube page, and on Facebook Live. This semester, we're really going to put an emphasis on talking to folks in the hospitality industry. And today we are super excited to be joined by Basil Lee from Finback Brewery in Glendale. Basil, thanks so much for being here today and welcome to the series.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Basil, can you tell us a little bit about Finback Brewery, how you guys got started, and a little bit about yourself?
Yep. So we are a kind of small craft brewery in Queens. We pretty much brewed our first beer end of 2013. So I guess we kind of officially opened 2014, early 2014. We brew all sorts of craft beer. You know, one of our kind of things is playing with ingredients and being creative and experimenting with different beers. And the business really came from, at that time, it was a passion project. It was, me and a good friend, the other kind of co-founder, co-owner, were home brewers in the city, really had a passion for beer, which is a very typical story for craft beer breweries of that time. But there weren't very many craft breweries in New York City. Really, at that time, there were like maybe 8 or so in 2012, 13. And so we thought it would be a great idea to open a brewery. I think in the end, it turned out actually to be a pretty good idea to open a brewery in New York City at that point. And so we kind of really just pulled all of our resources together to try to make it happen. And here we are 6 years, 7 years later.
That's awesome. Now, was this your first venture into being an entrepreneur, or was this something you had kind of done before?
Yeah, this is definitely my first venture as an entrepreneur. I think I kind of grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My parents were small business owners, and it was like a family business with my aunts and uncles. And they were in the restaurant business and the food business. So there's a little bit of kind of connection there. And then I worked actually in a creative field. I was an architect, so something pretty different. But I think beer, and certainly opening the brewery, was very much a kind of creative drive as well. I mean, I think for us was really kind of making beers the way we wanted to make them was very much why we wanted to open the brewery. And the kind of business entrepreneurial aspect was, I think, also just a really kind of personal desire to kind of try to bring that together in a project that kind of brought it real and made it beyond just a kind of apartment hobby.
Awesome. So, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure that you wear a bunch of hats at the brewery. Can you tell us a little bit about your day to day and what the, kind of just what's it like being a brewer?
Yeah, so I would say that even in our relatively short existence, my role has changed a lot. In the beginning, being kind of a 2-person company, we literally did everything ourselves. So 2 of us brewed the beer, we went out and sold the beer, we delivered the beer in a rented U-Haul in the beginning. And so we literally did everything ourselves. I think over time, it's interesting as an owner, just the kind of role you play, because in the end, it's kind of a catch-all position and still somewhat, I feel like my role is that where I personally don't brew any beer now. So my partner handles that aspect of the business, although he doesn't actually brew that much of the beer or brew the beer on a day-to-day basis either. So I feel like both of us have dealt a bit more on the kind of forward-looking things of the business, as well as all the nitty-gritty. So I still do a lot of the things that are just kind of catch-all things, definitely a lot of the kind of business and accounting and things like that, but also just trying to take on the role of trying to, I guess, in a way, lead and manage the team so that we get all of our staff to really be able to kind of have a say and a role in kind of running the business and making it successful.
That's awesome. So I know that, one, being a business owner is a unique experience, but it's especially unique doing it here in New York City and in Queens County. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the landscape of your industry is here right now, and then also what it's like operating a business in New York City and your favorite part about it.
Yeah. So I think New York City is both like a wonderful and super challenging place, of course, to open a business. And maybe I'll touch on COVID after, but kind of pre-COVID, I think New York City offers really, I mean, to me, I'm not from here. I'm from New England originally. I'm from Rhode Island, but lived here for a long time. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to come is just the vibrancy and just all of the kind of cultural and food and activity that New York has to offer. And I think that's true with a lot of people who move here. Is that it's a wonderful place, especially for a young person. It's just so much to do and to absorb. And so in that sense, we really wanted to open a brewery here. I think that you both have access to really interesting and dynamic people who I think are passionate about a lot of things, as well as on the kind of staff side, people, it's you can always find, I think, wonderful people who have a similar vision and want to, let's say in beer, make beer and are passionate about brewing. So I think it's like a wonderful place to open a business for sure. I think it also, what's interesting is New York City, from a beer standpoint, from a craft beer standpoint, was really late to the game. Like if you look at other kind of markets, the West Coast and certain cities there, the Pacific Northwest, even like Vermont, Massachusetts, really had a much stronger craft beer community for a lot longer than New York. And I think one of the reasons is that New York, it's a bit more difficult to open, I think, small businesses for kind of, small scale, I guess, passion type project businesses. But then New York City actually brought all of and I'll say, like, there was the class of 2014 in a way. There were probably like 10 breweries that opened in 14 and then another 10 or so in 15. So there's kind of an explosion right in those couple of years. And I think because New York City is such a dynamic and kind of competitive place, we all, I think, made or caught up to these other craft beer cities because of New York, because what New York does. And then I think in terms of the changes to New York City in terms of COVID, I mean, I think there's been a lot of challenges in that sense. And I think definitely the density of New York City and all of those things have caused some challenges recently as well.
Awesome. So what's something about your industry that you wish you could have told yourself before you got into it?
Yeah, I think I think before opening the brewery, I will say very many of the things, at least from a personal standpoint, that I did was around breweries and beer, which is, I feel like I attended. I went to visit breweries, would drink at breweries, would tour them, attended a lot of beer festivals, and so I felt like a lot of the things that I kind of was really interested about the beer industry were the things that kind of ultimately pushed me to want to open a brewery. That sense of community. So a lot of those things kind of bore true with opening a brewery in the industry. I would say one thing I would want to tell myself is really the importance of I guess engagement. I think the beer industry, but also just industries in general, are so much about people and building community. And I think craft beer is really foundationally built on that. I think the amount of support that the craft beer industry or the amount of success the craft beer industry has gone through in the past years is really because of the strength of the community, in that people are really just, it still amazes me that people will go to a brewery out of their way to find beer, right? I mean, that is the most wonderful thing in the world. And to me, I think, even though it was certainly a thing that we understood, but really making that front and center, which is how you build community from the beginning, I think is really important.
Okay. How has it been building that community over the last couple of years? What are some of the different strategies that you guys have used to build it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of it is, sorry, I'm just gonna,
Oh,
pardon
no,
me for
you're
1
good.
second. Just a little dog.
That's awesome.
I think so much of it is, it's almost like I think the industry is just naturally kind of founded on that. So for us, very early on, I think you have to reach out to, of course, how you sell beer. So building that community, both in terms of just trying to get people into the tap room through a network of people who like beer, and and maybe I'll back up for a second, which is to say that when we first opened, almost all of the breweries that opened kind of knew each other. They either came from the New York City homebrewing world, or they worked at similar breweries. And so it was a very close, close knit community already. And so definitely being part of that. And then I think, we were talking a little bit, but engaging in festivals and engaging in, events at bars and things like that, that I think definitely helps build the community and just stays engaged in the community. More recently, we've been trying to do some more projects that are for sure that kind of are not as directly related to beer, kind of, whether it's kind of social things or just supporting various efforts. I think everyone, beer is such a thing that, people are just kind of, it's one of the things that is always at events, right? So if you have a party, you're going to have beer or wine or something like that. And so I think there's a natural way for people to kind of want to engage the beer industry, even outside of the beer industry. And so, yeah, some of those things for sure.
Okay. Awesome. So a lot of students that we have come on here are always asking, what advice do you have for young entrepreneurs that are looking to start their own business? Could you speak a little bit about, what it was like doing it for the first time, and any advice that you have for students?
Yeah, I think in terms of advice on starting your own business, I think I would say perseverance and tenacity are probably the most important. I do think also just really, of course, all of the common sense things, really trying to do your research, understanding the industry, understand what you're interested in and where your passion lies. Because I think that ultimately a business is successful because you really enjoy doing it. I think, and even the very mundane things of a business, I think that it oftentimes I see even ideas that I have, or that friends have had, or people I've seen who've been entrepreneurs who've had, who I think are terrible ideas, and yet they find success because they really do have a passion for it, and that they're just always pushing to make it happen and keep it happening, or make it successful. That they do find an audience and they do find a market for it, and it becomes successful. So I do think that keeping an open mind, and then having an attitude where you can just keep doing it every day. Of course, you have to be flexible. So I think that's certainly true too. As there's so much learning and changing that I think a young entrepreneur has to go through to get to where they think they're trying to get.
All right, that's great advice. And this semester we're really trying to focus on the hospitality industry. Is there any advice that you have for students who are looking to maybe not be an entrepreneur in hospitality, but just start their career in hospitality?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll talk before touching on the hospitality industry broadly. I think in the beer industry, or the brewing industry, which is very much part of the hospitality industry, I think there's sometimes there's a sense from people who aren't quite, who haven't quite delved deeply into it yet, where you see the kind of 10% of what's interesting, right? The idea of almost brewing beer, making recipes, and tasting beer, and I think there's a lot of the background that goes into it that we don't really see, which is really the kind of more mundane things, right? Brewing beer is really very much cleaning and manufacturing and kind of lifting heavy things and all of that. So I think trying to get as much knowledge as you can before kind of reaching out. We often get a lot of resumes, and I appreciate the passion, but a lot of them are kind of come from a perspective of, oh, this would be fun. And wouldn't it be great if, and I have no experience. And that's always difficult, because I think you kind of want to get a sense of like what you're really going to be doing in a way before because maybe it's not for you when you actually realize that it's a lot of other things that aren't that interesting. So I think understanding what you're getting yourself into and what the industry really is number one. And then number two, I think it's really about And again, back to that other comment about community, it's about kind of getting into it. I think the hospitality world very much is about people, right? You look at bars and bartenders, and whether people are buying your beer, as in, bar owners that are buying your beer, or whatever it might be, it really is about having this network of people that you can be part of. And I think going to events and going to things like that kind of gets you into that network, and then seeing where your kind of talents lie gives you a good, I think, entry into the profession, especially for someone who's never done it, who's really trying to get in, as like a without experience kind of level. Certainly, I think beer and hospitality, you can have a kind of educational route, right? You can get kind of professional training in these things. That's certainly helpful. Although personally, I don't think it's 100% necessary. I think now more and more so, you're seeing people who come in with kind of professional training and experience before they even enter the profession. But I think with hospitality, so much of it is just about, in some ways, it's just about your connection with people and how you engage people. Because hospitality, so much of it is about just, making people comfortable. And so I think that's really important.
Awesome. Great advice again. We've got a couple questions coming in from people. The first one is, what is your favorite beer to make, and what is your favorite beer to drink at Finback?
I think, so we brew a lot of IPAs at Finback. I would say that my favorite beer to make is, there. So I'm going to have to admit that when we make beers, they're not, in terms of different styles and different beers, they're not that different in terms of how we make them. So the difference between brewing a Pilsner and IPA, for the most part, aren't that different. I will say I really love our wood aged and sour program. And some of that is really the idea of time and transformation in wood, in barrel, is really fascinating to me. So I would say our favorite beers to make, quote unquote, would be some of our wood beers. We've also done some different processes in terms of sour beers, whether it's spontaneous fermented beers. So in terms of making beers, I think those are my most kind of most interesting. In terms of favorite beer to drink, I would say, even though we make a lot of hoppy beers, and those are my favorite beers in terms of like impact, where like, oh, this is really, really this or that, really delicious. I would say my favorite beers to drink are still our Pilsners, and partly because they're kind of drinking beers, right? And you can have more than one, and it's not too overpowering. And so I think a lot of our Pilsners would be our Pilsners in general would be my favorite beers to drink.
Okay. Well, those all sound awesome. I'm gonna have to stop by sometime soon when that's allowed. Another question we have, was working in another industry. You talked about your career as an architect before becoming an entrepreneur helpful?
I would say absolutely. I think working in and I think this is true with across the board, just as a generalization. Working in architecture, and I'm going to plug architecture a little bit, which is to say that architecture is a very like broad, generalized kind of profession in some ways. Even though you deal with making buildings, you're really coordinating a lot of different elements. So you're looking at design, you're looking at structure, electrical engineering, and you're working with usually, or always teams of people. It's never by yourself making buildings. And so I think when that translated into kind of opening my own brewery, there was just a lot of the lessons that I learned in architecture translated really easily into beer. I think beer, again, very collaborative. I think you need other people to make any relatively, anything smaller than like a 1 or 2 person company. You need to get people on board, and how do you inspire people? And then also talking about these kind of creative things where making beer is a creative process. You're trying to essentially, develop things that are subjective and that have flavor profile and taste. And then you're trying to brand it, which I think is really important in terms of the design of labels and all of those things. And so I think architecture gave me a good foundation for kind of being able to coordinate each of these elements in the opening of the brewery process. And I also think just in general, outside of my experience, I think having different experiences always allows you to look at an industry with kind of fresh eyes. I think if you did something well and then you take it to another endeavor, it kind of gives you a way to look at that other thing that's unique, right? Because in some ways, I feel like if you're trained to be like everyone else, like I didn't really have a real deep beer industry knowledge, but I think if I did, I would have probably made somewhat better decisions. But I think some of those decisions wouldn't have allowed us to kind of innovate in a different way. So I think having different experience is really important.
Awesome. And then somebody's asking about how important is it to a small business to have, a secondary revenue stream? So I know primarily you guys sell beer, but I'm sure do you guys sell merchandise, or do you have like live events when those are allowed? Like, how do those other revenue streams play into your small business?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think a second revenue stream is great, and definitely very important. I would say for us, we have complementary revenue streams. And I think that in some ways is one of the challenges with, of course, with COVID, is especially in the hospitality industry directly, like with restaurants and bars, is that you rely on people coming to your place. And if essentially because of COVID in this case, no one can come, then it becomes very difficult, of course, right? And so when bars and restaurants and ourselves as well could pivot to delivery and to shipping beer, essentially getting your product out to customers in a different way, it's the only way any of us would have kind of survived. But in terms of the brewery, we already have, and for sure, I think absolutely important is to develop multiple revenue streams. So we sold through the tap room, we sold through wholesale sales, so we would deliver to restaurants and bars, and then we would also sell through distribution. So out of state, we would sell a little bit of beer, and so I think having the flexibility to kind of when one part of the business doesn't do so well, trying to rely on another, I think is an important thing.
Awesome. All right. So is there any other advice that you would have for students looking for, again, either a career in hospitality or, deciding to branch out and start their own business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is find what you're passionate about. And I know that sounds really cliched, but I think it's super true, because I think you need to have something that you just want to do day in and day out. And then I also think try to be, of course, having the kind of discipline and perseverance to continue and to really kind of drive it. Because I think that ideas take time to form. And I think we also need to give ourselves time to essentially get to hone our craft and get good at what we're trying to do. And so, of course, on the other side, if you can, this is probably a, business 101 thing, but, as much of a cushion you can have in terms of your startup capital and in terms of flexibility with giving yourself time for success is super important. Yeah, I think, those two items.
Okay. That's, yeah, awesome advice. Did you take any business classes by chance, or how did you kind of prepare for starting your own business after coming from architecture?
Yeah, I definitely kind of had a business-minded family that kind of supported myself. But I went to, when I was in school for architecture and things like that, we definitely had to take some kind of business classes or kind of real estate type classes. And so I think some of the, again, very preliminary stuff or kind of foundational stuff, but in terms of like simple, kind of business principles and accounting and things like that. So I had a little bit of experience. And then I think just the other, I would say, and I guess, probably not the most, what's the word, kind of, not the best thing to rely on, but I think for us, we were forced to learn quickly, right? When you open a business and you just need to figure it out very quickly. And so in that sense, a lot of, I feel like, at least for us, the business stuff was driven by just practical needs, right? How, and really simple things, how you try to sell product and then deal with like paying bills. And I think that that kind of reality forces you to learn very quickly.
Definitely. All right. Well, Basil, thank you so much for joining us here on the QCIC series. We really do appreciate you taking the time. We encourage everybody to check out their website and check them out on social media, and to stop by the brewery whenever that's safe and allowed to do so. So yeah, thank you so much, Basil, and thank you for everybody attending. We'll be back in the coming weeks with more of these QCIC student series on our Facebook page and on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.